The NEC has been in a very similar form and format and set of words for 25 odd years now, and I think most of the other contract forms have moved on and adapted and changed quite a lot. One of the questions I'm often asked is, well, how should we go about improving the NEC? What's the next thing that we need to be doing to make it work better in a practical sense? John, what would be your number one?
Well, my number one would be not to do with the contract documents. It would actually be getting people to do in practice what it actually says, and that would be the biggest improvement. For me, in terms of the contract, when the projects which I've been involved in which have been the most successful is where they've actually actively sought out opportunities to build in, if you like, buffer, so that when the inevitable downside occurred, there was space to absorb it in the programme. So I'd like a twist on the early warning procedure to identify opportunities.
Ewan, how would that sit with the other programming requirements and generally how the management of the project's going to work? Do you think that's achievable?
Well, it depends what you mean by buffer, John.
Yeah. I was aware when I said that.
Yes, I mean the NEC I think is quite helpful in the fact that it sets out things relating to terminal float, the difference between plan completion and the contract completion date. And that is an example of the NEC recognising such a situation. And we have float in the project before the plan completion date, which is owned by the project. But I think I would need further clarification what the difference between the buffer and the float to which you refer is.
Just is really, if I say, normally if you've got a lack of float at the end of the programme, what happens is that when problems occur, people get in a panic, and it's how can we minimise that? And because normally by then contractual liability is at stake, people argue, or there's a tendency, people go into fight or flight. Where people proactively identify opportunities and try and bring back the contractual planned completion so that there's more float at the end, terminal float, then that gives the parties more leeway so that when the inevitable stuff, risk, threat happens, they can be a bit more relaxed, open, and I don't mean relaxed in I'll let it go, but actually we're not under quite as much stress.
Ian, I think the industry's moved on a little bit over the last 25 years, and particularly if you look in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, there's much more focus on things that are peripheral to the contract, perhaps the use of building information modelling and BIM models and the use of early contractor involvement. Now, the NEC does have a supplement for ECI. It's looked at how to incorporate BIM, but it hasn't done it in the same way as the rest of the contract suite, sort of merging it all in together and making it a much easier sort of pick and choose. Is there something there that can be improved from the NEC side?
I think potentially so. I mean, certainly bringing some of those into the core of the contract may well be beneficial. I mean, obviously it's an iterative process in terms of how they go through and revise the contracts. But it doesn't stop you bringing into the works information, for example, additional requirements, additional provisions, issues around BIM, etc. So I think that you still have a very good starting point with the contracts as they are, and the works information is a great vehicle for bringing in additional requirements, additional provisions to cover for some of these issues.
I think for me that's a key issue, is where you put this adaptation. And while the works information is the right vehicle for some of it, and particularly looking at how you're explaining what the works are and how you're going to carry them out, there's some things that don't really sit very happily within the works information and should perhaps come back into core or optional clauses, or dare I say, because I don't think we can get through this discussion without mentioning Z clauses and your opportunity to add additional bespoke clauses or make adaptations through them. John, how do you think that works in practice? I mean, can you do everything just through the works information, or do you need to stop and say, hang on a minute, no, actually I do need a Z clause or an adaptation here?
Well, the thing about works information is it can be varied during a contract, so that gives you flexibility. But at the same time, there are certain things where if you're a contractor going into a contract and you go, my God, the employer, the project manager can vary that, can change the deal halfway through the contract, you're going to be wary. So there's a place for having things in option Z clauses. Conditions of contract can't be agreed unless the change is agreed by the parties. And there's a place for having stuff in the works information where you think you might need flexibility.
Ewan, what would be the key change that you'd like to see come through next in implementing the NEC at a practical level?
At a practical level, I would like to see some clarification on when assessing delay and when it is compared to the accepted programme, should you or should you not take account of progress that's been achieved since that last programme was accepted?
I think there's some very interesting issues that have come out of that. I think I sort of agree with John that the first step is let's take what we've got and actually use that properly before we worry about taking it off in a different direction. I think, again, John's point about building in a buffer to make the process work better, building in the new industry thinking, whether it's BIM or ECI or anything else that's coming through the use of technology, I think is equally important. And then sort of getting the guidance on how some of the core areas of the contract which can drive the parties apart, if not dealt with quite quickly, is going to be important. So I think there's a lot of potential improvement that can be made, and it's interesting times to see how the NEC develops in the future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.